Imagine a world you wouldn't even recognize. A sky of orange smog choked with gases that would be poisonous to us. Oceans not of blue, but of a murky, iron-rich green. And a sun much dimmer than our own, struggling to cut through that thick, toxic haze. Non-living chemistry, just a random soup of molecules, somehow crossed an invisible line and became biology. The first simple living thing blinked into existence. But what if it didn't? What if life ignited almost the instant the world was cool enough to hold water? The name comes from Hades, the underworld, and for good reason. This was the era of the late heavy bombardment, a time when the inner solar system was a cosmic shooting gallery. Asteroids and comets, some the size of small countries, relentlessly pummeled the young Earth. They weren't the salty blue expanses we know today, but probably a global ocean that was hot, acidic, and loaded with dissolved minerals like iron, which would have given it a sickly, olive-green color. So now we have the main ingredient for life as we know it, liquid water. Earth is a geologically active planet. Plate tectonics, the constant churning of the Earth's crust, has destroyed almost all of the planet's original surface rocks. Finding a rock older than 3.5 billion years is incredibly rare. So, how could we possibly find a trace of the very first microscopic life? These weren't just crater-forming events, they were sterilizing events. See, living things process elements in a particular way. Take carbon, the backbone of life. It's a single data point from a single crystal, and some argue there might be weird, non-biological chemical processes that could create a similar signature. Here, we find some of the oldest intact rock formations on the planet, dating back to about 3.7 billion years ago. And within these ancient rocks, scientists have found graphite with that same chemical signature of life. It's a whisper, a ghost of a possibility. Carbon comes in different versions, or isotopes, that have slightly different weights. There's the lighter, more common carbon-12, and a heavier, rarer version, carbon-13. Life, it turns out, is a bit lazy. We haven't found a fossil, but we've found the chemical shadow of a thriving biosphere. Life wasn't just a tiny fluke by this point, it was already a global phenomenon. We have a planet with oceans, a thick atmosphere, and a cocktail of chemicals from volcanoes and space rocks. But it's still a cauldron, a place of extremes. And it's in this seemingly impossible environment that our story really begins. The big question is this: how do you go from a soup of dead chemicals, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen sloshing around in a hot, violent ocean, to something that lives asterisk? Scientists found zircon crystals in the Jack Hills that are an astonishing 4.1 billion years old. And trapped inside one of these ancient zircons, they found a tiny speck of graphite pure carbon. When they analyzed its isotopic signature, they found it was isotopically light. It had that telltale high ratio of carbon-12 that points to biological activity. A big enough impact would have boiled the oceans and vaporized any new life trying to get a foothold. That gap between complex but lifeless chemistry and simple but living biology is the most profound leap in the known universe. And finding the evidence for that leap is one of the toughest challenges in all of science. It seems like the worst possible place for life to begin. A world that was actively, violently hostile to existence itself. This was Earth's infancy, right after its formation around 4.54 billion years ago, and it was a time of unimaginable violence. All that volcanic activity, while destructive, was also burping out essential gases from inside the planet, forming that early, thick atmosphere. And those comets and asteroids that brought destruction, they also brought water. For millions of years, icy comets rained down, dropping their precious cargo onto the cooling surface. The young planet was basically a molten ball of seething magma. There was no solid ground, no blue oceans, no air we could breathe. The atmosphere was a crushing blanket of carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and steam, a far cry from the gentle blue sky we have today. The latest evidence is forcing us to rethink everything we thought we knew. The story of life might be far, far older than we ever imagined, starting not in some quiet little pond, but in the heart of the planet's most violent and alien places. Every single living creature that has ever been on this planet, every plant, every animal, you and I, we all trace our lineage back to that single, miraculous spark. This was our planet, Earth, for hundreds of millions of years. A world of fire and water, of violent bombardments from space and unbelievable volcanic eruptions. By all accounts, it was a hellscape, a sterile, lifeless rock hurtling through the dark. And yet, in that planetary inferno, something impossible happened. Amidst all the chaos and violence, the sterile became fertile. But how? How did a dead world come alive? This is the greatest detective story ever told. It is a story that takes us back more than 4 billion years to find microscopic clues hidden in ancient rocks, to piece together the recipe for life, and ask one of the biggest questions we can possibly ask: what or where was the spark? Our planet is approximately 4.5 billion years old. For a long time, the thinking was that life took its sweet time waiting for the Earth to calm down a bit. To get to the beginning, we have to travel back to an age so remote it feels almost mythical, the Hadean Eon, and the sky was always falling. But in all this chaos, the seeds of possibility were being planted. Slowly, painstakingly, this water started to pool. And by about 4.3 billion years ago, something truly remarkable had happened. The Earth had oceans. The stage is set. How do you get from rocks, water, and gas to the first living cell? Trying to find clues from the Hadean and the later Urey Eon is like solving a crime scene that is 4 billion years old, where the evidence has been burned, buried, melted, and recycled over and over. Scientists have had to become forensic geochemists, looking not for bones or shells, but for the faintest chemical echoes of life. The enzymes that organisms use to grab carbon from the environment find it easier to work with the lighter carbon-12, so any carbon that's been processed by a living thing will have a higher ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-13 than non-living carbon. It's a biological signature, an isotopic fingerprint. Armed with this, scientists searched through the oldest materials they could find. Their search led them to the Jack Hills in Western Australia. The rocks there aren't the oldest, but they contain something that is, tiny, super durable crystals called zircons. Zircons are geological time capsules. They form in magma, and once they crystallize, they are almost indestructible. They can survive even when their parent rock is completely gone. Could this be it? Evidence of life 4.1 billion years ago. It's a tantalizing clue, but it's still hotly debated. For stronger evidence, we go to the Asua supercrustal belt in Greenland. This isn't just a microscopic speck. It's found within a whole rock layer, giving us much stronger evidence that something biological was happening in the oceans 3.7 billion years ago. Chemical fingerprints are powerful, but scientists are a skeptical bunch. They want to see the body. They want a fossil. But what kind of fossil would the first life on Earth leave behind? Stromatolites are mounds, sometimes domed, sometimes cone-shaped, built-up layer by painstaking layer by massive colonies of microbes. Picture a shallow, sunlit sea on the early Earth. A slimy mat of photosynthetic microbes grows on the seafloor, trapping bits of sediment from the water. It would push the origin of life way back, to a time when Earth was barely out of its Hadean phase, suggesting that life popped up almost as soon as the planet had liquid water. But this just makes the central mystery even deeper. Knowing asterisk when asterisk doesn't tell us asterisk how asterisk. How do you get from non-living chemistry to biology? You need lipids, fatty molecules that form membranes to create little bags or compartments to hold all the machinery of life. They set up one of the most famous experiments in scientific history to simulate the conditions of the early Earth in a flask. The water, at first clear, slowly turned brown and then a deep, murky red. Given the right stuff and some energy, it can happen naturally. Now, we know their guess about the early atmosphere probably wasn't quite right. Geologists now think it was less rich in methane and ammonia and had more carbon dioxide and nitrogen. But that doesn't kill the experiment's core finding. Later experiments using these more neutral gases have also successfully produced amino acids and other organic compounds. When Miller analyzed what was in this primordial soup, he found something amazing. The simple, inorganic gases had spontaneously formed complex organic molecules. He had created multiple types of amino acids, the very building blocks of proteins. They built a closed loop of glass flasks and tubes. In one flask, they boiled water to make steam, mimicking the early ocean. That vapor mixed with gases they thought were in the early atmosphere: methane, ammonia, and hydrogen. We know the early Earth was bombarded by comets and asteroids. In 1969, we got an answer when a meteorite fell near Murchison, Australia. This meteorite was a carbonaceous chondrite, a primitive space rock that's basically a fossil from the formation of our solar system. When scientists analyzed it, they found it was packed with organic molecules. It contained dozens of different amino acids, many of them the same ones life uses here on Earth. This was stunning proof. The raw ingredients for life aren't unique to Earth. They are common throughout our solar system. To simulate an energy source like lightning, they zapped the gas mixture with electric sparks. They could have been cooked up in Earth's atmosphere and oceans, powered by lightning, volcanoes, or the sun. Or they could have been delivered by a constant rain of meteorites and comets. Most likely, it was both. The early Earth was a rich chemical factory, swimming in the very ingredients needed to build the first life. The parts were there. Now, they just needed to be put together. You need nucleic acids like DNA and RNA, which are the information-bearing molecules that store the blueprints. And you need amino acids, the building blocks that link together to form proteins. Proteins are the real workhorses of the cell, doing everything from catalyzing reactions to providing structure. To get life, you first need a good supply of these building blocks. But where did they come from on a sterile, early Earth? To figure that out, we need to break life down into its basic parts. What are we actually made of? It would mean life didn't start in some peaceful, sunny pond, but in the dark, crushing depths of the ocean, feeding on chemical energy from the Earth itself. But these fossils are highly controversial. Skeptics argue that similar-looking structures can be formed by purely non-biological chemical reactions. The debate is fierce and ongoing, a perfect example of science at the cutting edge, where extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence. What is clear, though, is that by at least 3.5 billion years ago, life was well established, with tantalizing hints that it could be much, much older. To avoid being buried and to stay in the sunlight, the microbes move up through the sediment, starting a new layer on top. Over thousands of years, this creates a solid, layered structure, a microbial high-rise city preserved in stone. These weren't creatures with bones or shells. They were microscopic, single-celled organisms. But then, scientists went back to one of the best-preserved ancient landscapes on Earth, the Pilbara Craton in Western Australia. In a place called the Dresser Formation, they found something incredible. Fossilized stromatolites with their distinct layered structures, locked in rocks dated to 3.48 billion years old. For a long time, this was the oldest undisputed physical evidence of life on Earth. These weren't just chemical whispers. They were the fossilized ruins of entire ecosystems, thriving nearly 3.5 billion years ago. An individual fossil would be almost impossible to find or confirm. In 2017, a research team announced a discovery from the New Voyagetuk supercrustal belt in Quebec, Canada. These rocks are thought to be the remnants of an ancient deep-sea hydrothermal vent system and are incredibly old, dated to at least 3.77 billion years and maybe as old as 4.8 billion years. Inside these rocks, the scientists found tiny filaments and tubes made of an iron oxide called hematite. They argue that the intricate shape, some branching, some with little knobs, were identical to the structures made by iron-eating bacteria near modern-day hydrothermal vents. But what if these microbes didn't live alone? What if they lived in huge, organized communities, building structures so large you could see them with the naked eye? Enter the stromatolites. The word just means layered rock, and that's exactly what they are. For a long time, the oldest known stromatolites were about 2.7 billion years old. But the story might be even older, and it takes us to a much more extreme place. If this is right, it's a game changer, so we have a time and a place. Life was on Earth at least 3.5 billion years ago, probably in its turbulent oceans. At the most fundamental level, all life on Earth is built from a few key molecules. This was the question that obsessed a young grad student named Stanley Miller and his mentor, Harold Urey, in 1952. The experiment ran for a week. The Miller-Urey experiment was a landmark. It proved that the leap from simple chemistry to the building blocks of biology was some near impossible step. But what if the building blocks didn't have to be made on Earth at all? What if they were delivered, ready-made, from space? So, we have two great sources for the building blocks of life. They could have been cooked up in Earth's atmosphere and oceans, powered by lightning, volcanoes, or the sun. Or they could have been delivered by a constant rain of meteorites and comets. Most likely, it was both. The early Earth was a rich chemical factory, swimming in the very ingredients needed to build the first life. The parts were there. Now, they just needed to be put together. Assembling them into the complex, working machinery of life is something else entirely. It's the difference between a pile of bricks and a house. So, where on the early Earth could you find a natural laboratory like that? For that, you need a special kind of place. Having a supply of amino acids is one thing. The sun would provide energy, and as water evaporated, the chemicals would become more concentrated, making it more likely for them to link up. A place that can concentrate these simple molecules, get them close enough to react, and provide a steady source of energy to drive those reactions towards something more complex. These vents gush superhot, acidic water. But they're probably too hot and chaotic for the delicate chemistry needed to start life, but by a chemical reaction between seawater and mantle rocks. This reaction, called serpentinization, creates fluids that are warm, not boiling, and highly alkaline. But there's another, much more promising type of vent, the alkaline hydrothermal vent. A more protected, stable environment seems like a better bet. Charles Darwin famously thought about this, picturing a warm little pond where all the necessary chemicals could build up and, powered by sunlight, form into proteins. And it's inside the tiny pores of these bizarre towers that we find a near-perfect nursery for life. What if, before the world of DNA and proteins, there was a world run by a different molecule? A molecule that could do both jobs, a molecule called RNA. How do you get from a soup of chemicals to a system that can actually replicate and evolve? Randomly, they start linking into short RNA chains. Most are useless. But by pure chance, one forms with a special property, the ability to act as a template, grabbing other nucleotides and linking them together to make a copy of itself, the first self-replicating molecule. In our cells, its main job is to act as a messenger, carrying instructions from the DNA out to the cell's protein-building factories. From that RNA world, the more stable DNA and the more efficient proteins could later evolve, taking over their specialized jobs and leaving RNA as the bridge between them. But scientists discovered that some RNA molecules, called ribozymes, can fold up into complex shapes, just like proteins, and actually catalyze chemical reactions. That molecule would then outcompete the others. This is natural selection acting on individual molecules. DNA is the master blueprint. It stores all the genetic information. RNA could solve the chicken and egg problem. It could be both the chicken asterisk and asterisk the egg. It could store the genetic recipe and it could do the chemical work. Most of these new versions would be worse at replicating and would just fizzle out. This led to the RNA world hypothesis, the idea that the very first life was based on RNA alone. But DNA is just an archive. It doesn't do anything on its own. To use that information, the cell needs proteins. Proteins act as enzymes that read the DNA and build everything else, including more DNA. So you need DNA to make proteins, but you need proteins to make DNA. Which came first? It seems like an unbreakable circle. This is a classic chicken and egg problem that stumped scientists for decades. In March 2024, scientists at the Salk Institute created an RNA enzyme in the lab that can accurately copy other RNA strands while also allowing new, improved versions to emerge over time. The difference in acidity between the vent fluid and the seawater creates a natural electrical gradient. Sheltered from the harsh UV radiation and asteroid impacts at the surface, these deep-sea vents may have been the energy-rich incubators where chemistry finally crossed the line into biology. This is huge because every living cell on Earth today uses a similar gradient across its membrane to generate energy. The small chambers act like natural beakers, concentrating organic molecules and stopping them from just floating away. For a long time, this was a popular idea. Shallow pools on volcanic islands or near coastlines could have collected organic molecules. But the warm little pond has some big problems. A shallow surface environment is extremely vulnerable. These are cracks on the ocean floor where seawater seeps down into the crust, gets heated by magma, and then shoots back out, loaded with dissolved minerals. The young Earth didn't have a protective ozone layer, so the surface was blasted by intense, sterilizing ultraviolet radiation from the sun, which would tear complex molecules apart as fast as they formed. And those ponds were sitting ducks for asteroid impacts. This is what led scientists to the bottom of the ocean, to one of the most alien environments on our planet today, hydrothermal vents. At first, the focus was on the dramatic black smokers, first discovered in 2001. In a field called the Lost City, these vents aren't formed by direct volcanic heat. When these warm, alkaline fluids bubble up and mix with the cold, slightly acidic seawater of the early ocean, they build huge, porous chimney structures made of carbonate minerals. More importantly, these vents provide a gentle, continuous energy source. Alkaline vents are like planetary-scale batteries, providing the power needed to build complex molecules from simple ones like hydrogen and carbon dioxide. Okay. We have the building blocks, we have a plausible location. Now we hit the hardest part of the puzzle. In all modern life, the work is split up. For years, this was a massive roadblock. But then, starting in the 1980s, a beautifully elegant solution emerged. RNA, or ribonucleic acid, is DNA's lesser-known cousin. Like DNA, it can store genetic information. This was the aha moment. Imagine, in those mineral-rich pores of a hydrothermal vent, a soup of RNA's building blocks, called nucleotides, is forming. This is the start of heredity, but for evolution to kick in, you need mistakes. The copying process wouldn't be perfect. Mutations would create slightly different RNA sequences. But every so often, a mistake might create an RNA molecule that was a little better at replicating. Maybe it was more stable or faster. And powerful new research is backing this up. They demonstrated Darwinian evolution in a test tube. Eventually, this system of replicating RNA, maybe wrapped in a simple fatty bubble, would become the first protocell. Once life got started, probably as a simple, single-celled organism, it began to slowly change the entire planet. For the first billion years or so, life existed in a world without free oxygen. A group of bacteria called cyanobacteria figured out a revolutionary new trick. The atmosphere was a mix of carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and a lot of methane, probably made by early microbes. The oceans were full of dissolved iron, but eventually the iron was all used up. The oxygen had nowhere left to go but into the atmosphere. As these cyanobacteria spread across the globe, they started pumping this toxic waste into the oceans and the air, but out of it, a new world was born. It paved the way for the evolution of a new, more complex type of cell, the eukaryote, the kind of cell that eventually built plants, fungi, and animals like us. The very gas that caused the first great extinction became the fuel for the explosion of complex life that followed. Life was stuck in the shadows, near deep-sea vents, or in places where it could perform a type of photosynthesis that doesn't produce oxygen. But then, somewhere around 2.4 billion years ago, a new player evolved that would cause the single greatest environmental disaster and, at the same time, the greatest opportunity in the history of life. They developed a new kind of photosynthesis that was way more efficient. It used the most abundant resource around water and split its molecules to get energy. The waste product of this new process was a highly reactive, toxic gas, oxygen. For almost all life on Earth at the time, which had evolved in an oxygen-free world, this was pure poison. At first, the oxygen just reacted with all the iron in the oceans, causing it to rust and sink to the seafloor, forming the vast iron deposits we mine today. This kicked off the Great Oxidation Event. The rising oxygen levels caused a global mass extinction of anaerobic life. It was a planetary apocalypse. The oxygen in the atmosphere created the ozone layer, which shielded the Earth's surface from deadly ultraviolet radiation, making the continents habitable for the first time. More importantly, oxygen allowed for a much more powerful way to get energy from food, aerobic respiration. An organism using oxygen can get almost 20 times more energy out of its food than one that doesn't. This huge energy surplus unlocked a whole new level of complexity. It paved the way for the evolution of a new, more complex type of cell, the eukaryote, the kind of cell that eventually built plants, fungi, and animals like us. The very gas that caused the first great extinction became the fuel for the explosion of complex life that followed. The story of life is a story of impossible transformations, from geochemistry to biology, from an alien world to the vibrant planet we know today. It's a story we're still uncovering, with new discoveries changing what we know all the time. If you're fascinated by this deep history and want to explore more of the epic story of our planet, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next journey into the past. So, we've traveled back across the eons, from a world of fire and rock to a planet teeming with microscopic life. We've seen how the raw ingredients could have formed right here or been delivered from space. We've explored the leading candidate for life's nursery, the warm, energy-rich alkaline hydrothermal vents deep in the ocean. And we've tackled the great chicken and egg paradox with the beautiful solution of the RNA world, a time when a single molecule could kickstart evolution all by itself. This story is our best understanding right now, pieced together from fragmented clues from chemical shadows and ancient crystals to fossilized microbial cities and the genetic code of modern life. But it is far from a complete story. Science isn't about having all the final answers. It's a dynamic, ongoing process of asking better questions, and the origin of life is still one of the most profound and active areas of research. Huge questions are still out there. Was the origin of life an incredibly unlikely fluke, a chemical accident that happened just once in this corner of the galaxy? Or is it a natural, almost inevitable outcome when a planet has the right ingredients and conditions? Could life have started multiple times on Earth, only for one version to win out? We still don't know the exact step-by-step path from a soup of simple chemicals to a self-replicating RNA molecule. But every new discovery, every ancient fossil, every lab experiment that successfully copies a piece of the puzzle gets us a little closer to understanding our own ultimate origin story. And the implications go far beyond our own planet. As we start to explore other worlds in our solar system, like the subsurface oceans of Jupiter's moon Europa or Saturn's moon Enceladus, which might have their own hydrothermal vents, we're not just looking for life. We're looking for the very same conditions that may have sparked it on our own world 4 billion years ago. The quest to understand how life began here is, in the end, the same quest to find out if we're alone in the universe. It's a story that reminds us that from the most violent and hostile beginnings, something truly wondrous can emerge. A story of how a dead planet, against all odds, sparked into life.